Okay, so I've never told anyone this story before, but I figured this would be a good place to get it out of my system. This is one of the scariest nights of my life, and it still makes me scared to drive alone at night. The only person in my real life who knows this story is one of my older brothers, who was there after everything went down. So to preface this story, I'm currently a 21-year-old female, and I live in Ohio. At the time this story takes place, I was moving from a very well-known suburb outside of a main city to a rural farming town with my family. My parents have never been the city type, as they had both grown up on farms in the South during their childhoods, and our whole family had lived in similar areas until I was about to enter high school, so you can understand how itchy they were to get back to their roots. I'm the youngest of 4 siblings. I have 3 older brothers, and I was the last to finish required schooling. So the summer after I graduated from high school, my parents decided this was a good opportunity for a change of scenery because I was no longer tied down to a school district. The town that we were moving to was only around 45 minutes away, and instead of moving everything all at once and overwhelming ourselves with a full house of boxes, we were moving to a house about half the size of the one that we'd been living in. My parents opted to have us move a chunk of our things every day, or every few days for about 2 to 3 weeks, in hopes that it would be easier for us to get settled into our new house. The majority of the drive between the 2 towns is through main highways, and is pretty much a straight shot, so I had become very used to the routine drive after a while. That's why this night was so terrifying, because I had literally made this drive nearly 50 times, and I was so comfortable that my guard was let down completely. I'm a pretty small girl, around 5'3" and about 140 pounds. And even though my dad taught me self-defense when I was younger, I'm the kind of person who freezes during confrontation or under pressure. Annoying, I know. So it's a miracle I made it out of this whole thing safely. This night, I had decided to visit some old friends from the neighborhood that we were moving from. And because I was already down the street from my old house, I decided to stop by on my way back to our new house to pack some things to take back with me. I can't exactly remember what time it was. I'm pretty sure it was around 10 or 11 p.m. But regardless, it was already very dark outside. Now, even though Ohio is a northern state with pretty brutal winters, in recent years, the summers have been basically sweltering, even at night. I can also get a little car sick in the heat, with all the muggy air getting trapped in the car. And at the time, my AC was pretty shitty. It never really worked right, so I usually drove with my windows down. As I said, it was pretty late, so there were really no other cars on the road with me. I had maybe seen about 10 cars during the whole drive. When I made it a little over halfway on the second main highway I had to take, there was an intersection with a gas station on my right, and nothing but a river and a bridge on the left. It was a 4-lane, 2-way road, and I happened to be in the rightmost lane because of a turn I had to make further up the road. This might seem like useless information now, but it'll be important later. I hadn't initially felt off in any way, because again, I had made this drive dozens of times. I pulled up to a red light at this intersection, and I was playing some pop-punk music with my left arm out of my open driver's side window. I hadn't noticed at first, but as I was waiting for the light to change, another car had pulled up into the left lane next to me. Looking back now, I don't remember the make of the car. It might have been a Dodge Charger, but I do remember that it was bright orange, with a thick black stripe across the top of it. I was singing along to whatever song I had on at the time when I heard talking next to me. It wasn't so much that I heard them specifically talking about or to me or anything, but they were talking quite loudly, and I have ADHD, so the extra noise above the sound of my music made me turn my head. I regretted it immediately, because when I looked to the source of the noise, I saw a man sticking his head out of the passenger side window, staring right at me and smiling widely. The look in his eyes made me want to throw up. Apparently, he had been talking to me. I turned back quickly, knowing that if I kept eye contact any longer, he would think I was interested in chatting. Then I heard the sound of a hand hitting hollow metal. The guy in the car next to mine was smacking his hand on the outside of his car door, obviously trying to get my attention again. In the middle of all this, the front passenger started to whistle. You know, that signature whistle that a lot of girls get while walking down the street. I started to get angry because I wasn't a fucking dog, but I kept my gaze forward, praying for the light to change so I could get away from these creeps. Now, I know it sounds ridiculous that we're still sitting here at this red light, but the town that I had been passing through had really old and shitty light sensors, like the ones you have to back up and pull forward again to set off. And again, there hadn't really been anyone else on the road to set them off, because there weren't even cars coming perpendicular to us either. I hadn't given them any indication that I wanted to talk to them, but apparently this gave them more incentive to continue trying to get me to look back at them. The front passenger and the two other voices all piped up, saying things like,
"Hey baby, why don't you get out and hop in the car? We'll show you a good time tonight. Come on, pull over to the gas station. We're not going to hurt you. Why won't you talk to us? We just want to get to know you, beautiful."
At that point, I'm shaking, and it hurt enough, so I roll up my window and lock the doors of my car. Well, this had apparently pissed the front passenger off, because before the window was up, I heard him shout, "Fucking bitch," before swinging his car door open. Before I knew it, he had gotten out of his car and walked over to the passenger door behind me, trying to pull it open to get inside my car. This is why the specifics of my location were so important. I was basically trapped because if I tried to get out to go run to the gas station, or God forbid I had to run and cross the bridge on my left side, I would have to pass this car and the man outside mine to get there. Obviously, getting out of the car and running wouldn't be my best bet here, but at this point, I was so terrified. I was trying to weigh out all of my options. I know now would have been the best time to get the fuck out of there, but I'm literally paralyzed in fear. Again, confrontation freaks me out, and I can't even feel my feet to hit the gas, and my hands were gripping the steering wheel so hard I couldn't feel them either. The man quickly realized he wouldn't be able to get in and walked up to my window, starting to smack a fully open palm on the glass. He was hitting so hard that I actually thought I heard the glass creak, like it was going to crack and break in. When I still wouldn't look over at him, he stopped hitting the glass just long enough to spit all over my window. I have no idea what gave me the strength. Maybe it was the fact that he was literally about to break the glass and get into my car. But right as he lifted his arm, in what looked like him about to elbow my window, I said fuck it, hit the gas, running the red light, and definitely exceeding the speed limit to get the hell out of there. I don't know what made me look back, but when I glanced up at my rearview mirror, I saw that all three guys were now standing outside of the car. In one of their hands, I saw a small object, and to be quite honest, I don't even want to begin to think about what it might have been. I almost threw up from anxiety and pretty much cried the whole way home. My parents own a restaurant and are usually working late, so when I got home, my older brother was the only one there. He did his best to calm me down, but I don't think I slept at all that night. It's quite irrational because I know they hadn't followed me further than the light, but I even locked my bedroom door just to make me feel a little better. I regret not getting a license plate when I looked back, but as you can understand, I was so shaken up, I just wanted to get the hell out of there. I've never had an encounter like that again in that area, but granted, I found an alternative route through side streets, so I usually avoid that road altogether. Creepy-ass dudes who tried to kidnap me. I hope we never fucking meet again. My boyfriend was operated on his foot a few days prior, so he was still walking on crutches. We wanted to go to the city center to hang out with friends and get some drinks, but since cycling wasn't an option because of the crutches, we live in the Netherlands, so basically we use our bicycles for everything. We decided to walk. We don't live that far out of the center, about a 15-minute walk, so it seemed like the most logical choice at the time. We left the center around 2 in the morning. The way to our house is heavily populated, and there are always people on the streets. This night, however, it was quiet. We were about 5 minutes on the way when we spotted a guy on the opposite side of the street. He was looking at the shop windows, but also kept an eye on us. I suddenly felt very vulnerable, considering my boyfriend was walking on crutches, and me being quite small, 5'1". The guy walked in the opposite direction, but then walked back again, doing this a few times. I tried to walk faster, but my boyfriend couldn't keep up, so we had to keep quite a slow pace. All of a sudden, the guy crossed the road, really fast, in a straight line towards us. I'm small, but fierce, so I was ready to fight. When suddenly, around the corner, a homeless man came walking towards us in the man. He was shouting and cursing to no one in particular. Apparently, the homeless man had frightened the creepy guy so much, he immediately ran away. We walked away as quick as we could and kept looking back to see if the creepy guy had followed us, but we thankfully didn't see him again. I fully believe the creepy guy had bad intentions, maybe robbing us, maybe even worse, but I also believe that the homeless man saved us, intentional or not, and I am very grateful. It was about November 2012 in Houston, Texas. I was taking night classes to become a medical assistant. Trade school, only 8 months of school, Monday to Thursday nights, 5 p.m. to 10 p.m. I was driving a Volkswagen Passat, kind of girly, I know. I just left school at about 10:15, had some homework I had questions over, blah blah blah. Had to stop at Walgreens for a prescription. There's really only one 24-hour Walgreens near my home, and it's right down the street from my school. I'm wearing royal blue scrubs, my student ID, and I'm tired. Getting my prescription in the back of the store, I'm not really paying attention to my surroundings, but then someone caught my eye. It was this guy. He kind of stood at the end of each aisle I was on, but I thought he was there doing the same thing I was. Anyway, I head up to the register because I had a few other items I had gotten, not just the prescription, and I realized this guy had walked right past me and is standing outside near the trash cans at the entrance. As I'm walking to my car, I see him pick up his phone, and he is watching me hardcore. I can kind of read his lips. He was describing my appearance, car, builds, all that to someone on the phone. So I get in my car, start it. He does the same. Now, it's worth noting, this Walgreens is 2 blocks away from the courthouse and the sheriff's office. I drive straight there once I get my shit together in my car. This guy followed me in his vehicle before realizing where I'm really going. The courthouse and sheriff's office is kind of in a crappy neighborhood, or at least on the edge of it. I park, run inside, ask to speak to an on-duty officer, explain what had happened and what was happening. He takes a statement from me. I describe the man in almost perfect detail, and he offers me an escort home. We drive home, him a few car lengths behind me, and we make it there with no hiccups or no reappearance from the guy in his shitty Toyota Corolla. I park in my driveway. He circles around my cul-de-sac, and when he gets back to my house, he calls me over to the patrol car. He had his laptop up with this guy's mugshot and record right there. Asks, "Is this him?" I nod, yeah. What he told me next still freaks me the absolute fuck out. As we were driving to my house, the other sheriffs in the area found him, pulled him over, searched the car, and found a young gal, about my age, 19 at the time, in his trunk. He was known in the area for quote-unquote pimping and was trying to get me as a possible prostitute of his. I'm not going to go into too many details because, duh, but at the time, I lived in a very well-to-do suburb of Houston. This kind of thing does not happen there, or should I say, the news does not report it there. So, creepy-ass pimp dude, let's not ever meet. Well, you're probably in prison now still. Hi everyone. I don't normally make posts like this, but this is a very strange occurrence that I just had the urge to share. I do consider myself spiritual, but I am no way religious or actively practicing anything. Yesterday, I was in my bedroom with my younger sister and I was braiding her hair. It was taking a long time, and I realized I had to use the bathroom, so I told her to give me a minute and walked out. It's important to keep in mind that I didn't tell her where I was going, what I was doing, or how long I would be gone. I just got up and went straight to the bathroom. I was in there for about 10 minutes because I had gotten into an argument with my friend over text, which is important to note because it doesn't normally take me this long to use the bathroom. After I'm finished, I walk out of the bathroom to wash my hands. Our sink is on the outside. When I walked out, I was in direct view of my sister because the sink is across from my bedroom door. As I'm washing my hands, I noticed she was looking at me with a perplexed look on her face, so I asked her what was wrong. She calmly asks me how I could have walked out of the bathroom. This was a very oddly worded question, so I asked her what she meant. She asked me, "Weren't you just in the living room?" And I told her, "No, I've been in the bathroom the whole time." My sister began to look very sick as she told me, "I just talked to you in the living room. When did you walk into the bathroom?" In a very concerned tone. I insisted to her that I did not enter the living room, and since I had gotten up and walked out of my bedroom, there was no point in which I had entered the living room. I asked her what I had said to her when she saw me in the living room. She tells me that she saw me sitting on the couch with my hands neatly folded, and I was staring off into space. She then told me that I had a very disturbed and concerned look on my face, which prompted her to ask me what was wrong, to which she claimed I responded, "Nothing," in an eerie tone. My sister claims that the me she had seen looked just like me. My hair was in a loose bun. I was wearing my same gray shirt and old red pajama pants. My face was the same. Everything was the same, but it wasn't me. I know it wasn't me because I have no recollection of that happening. I was in the bathroom the entire time, distracted by my heated discussion. I have no idea how this happened, but my sister told me after our exchange, she felt nauseous, like something was off. I'm not sure what to make of this. I'm a pretty rational person, and I've heard stories like this before. I want to look into possible carbon monoxide poisoning because it has been known to cause hallucinations. However, only my sister has experienced this. Neither me or my roommate have seen anything out of the ordinary. We've been theorizing about parallel universes, possession, demons, curses, but we really don't know what's going on and are just looking for some answers. I'm a 32-year-old man from and currently living in Cumberland County, New Jersey, which puts me about 45 minutes away from Philadelphia and 45 minutes away from the Atlantic Ocean, while at the same time being only about 15 minutes away from Delaware Bay. After high school, I went into the Army as an intelligence analyst for a while, and when I got out, I moved to New York City and worked as a project manager for my construction company, until I met my wife and decided to move back to New Jersey to be closer to our family, since she was pregnant with our daughter. That's just some background on me. So this happened in October of 2018. It was about 11:45 at night, and I decided to go out on my front steps to smoke a couple of cigarettes before I tried to fall asleep. Everyone else in the house was already sleeping. It was a pretty clear night without many clouds in the sky, but there was some fog on the ground. As I was smoking, I looked at the fog, and to me it looked like there was movement in it. I know that sounds crazy, but it was almost like there was invisible camouflage things out there that I wouldn't be able to see if it weren't for the fog hanging on the ground. As I was looking at the fog, I noticed this white truck that had driven by 2 times at this point. I could hear a woman and a man yelling at each other when the truck stopped at the stop sign in front of my house, and the woman gets out screaming at the man and then slams the door as he pulls off fast. She then proceeds to walk into the woods across the street from me, which is really weird because there isn't anything back there, except for blue holes until you hit the bay. If I walk out of my door and just keep walking straight, there won't be any houses or civilization at all. Only trees and artificial lakes, blue holes, left over from sand plants until you hit the Delaware Bay. So at this point, it's been about 5 minutes since the woman walked into the woods, when things started going from weird to absolutely unbelievably scary, strange, and the most reality-shattering thing that's ever happened to me. I'm still looking at the movements that I'm seeing in the fog when I hear this very loud noise coming from the woods that sounded like metal being ripped apart. There really isn't a good example I can use for that sound because it was so unearthly. I'm sure it wasn't a natural sound. That sound lasted for about 10 to 15 seconds, then abruptly stopped and was replaced with a different sound, which I could feel more than I could hear. Imagine being aware that there is a huge sound happening by you, but is out of the frequency that your ears can hear. That's the best way I can describe it. The sound is a constant through the rest of this experience. This is the point where I will probably lose some people, and I'm aware of how crazy this all sounds. But as I'm getting adjusted to the sound, it feels like something reaches out to me mentally in my own head, but does so without words, and only conveys a feeling of calm and a heads up or warning for what's about to happen. It kind of feels like whatever it was feeling me out to see how I would react to what I was currently experiencing, like a security check. As I was having this feeling of calm conveyed to me, I noticed a light in the sky that seemed to have risen out of the woods, I would say about 5 or 6 miles away from me. At this point, it was only a ball of light in the distance, but I just knew that it was coming right towards me, although it wasn't moving very fast. Right after I noticed the light in the sky is when I started to get really freaked out, more than I've ever been in my whole life. In the woods across the street from me, which was no more than 50 yards, all these orbs of light start to appear. I could see some which seemed to flicker into existence. These orbs were all white light, which didn't light up the area around them like what you would expect from flashlights. There were probably about 12 to 16 of them, which moved in a totally smooth manner. Besides the trail to get into the woods, the area is so dense and infested with thorn bushes, it simply wouldn't be possible for people to move where the lights were moving, let alone do it completely smooth. I really am positive that they weren't people with flashlights because of the area and the characteristics of the light orbs themselves. So I'm just watching the orbs move around for about a minute, trying to make sense of what it is I'm seeing, when I look back up to the sky to find a craft coming practically right towards me, with it only being 1,000 yards away from me at this point. So I'm going back and forth, looking at the orbs on the ground and the craft, which I started to make out better. It was flying very low. I'd say it was only 3.5 to 4 stories off the ground. I see the path it's taking and see it's going to pass right in front of me at an angle which I'll be able to see underneath the craft and the side of it at the same time. The craft was a single-story dull black rectangle. I could see underneath the craft and saw that the rectangle was made up of 3 smaller rectangle panels that fit together to form a larger rectangle. I clearly saw that the craft was made up of 3 panels. The size is harder to estimate, but I would say it was about 35 yards long and 20 yards across. Underneath, there were lights flashing in a pattern which would cycle through, then cycle back the other way. In the moment, I thought that the craft was signaling to the orbs on the ground. It didn't make any sound at all, and all I was hearing was the same buzzing humming noise that I felt more than I heard. While it was in front of me, it was moving really slow, to the point where I don't think a plane with a normal propulsion system could even stay in the air at that speed. I take my eyes off the craft and look back down at the orbs, which are still moving all around, though one was starting to cross the street in front of me. I only took my eyes off the craft for a moment when I looked at the orbs, but when I looked back, the craft was gone. For whatever reason, when I saw the craft just vanish like that, the reality of what I was seeing really hit home, and I got scared, to be honest with you, since my daughter, wife, and mom were all no more than 50 feet away from all this craziness I was watching, so I went inside and locked the doors. I just felt like I'd be willing to investigate more if it wasn't just my life that I was playing with, but I wasn't willing to take that chance with my family's lives. I could have just been paranoid at this point, but I felt like I was being watched for the next 2 hours. I didn't have any lost time from this event, and the entire thing happened only over a period of 20 to 30 minutes. Looking back on the event now, I question what exactly was going on with that white truck and the woman who walked into the woods at the beginning of this post. I've also done some research and found that there are a good number of reports of people seeing a glimmer man in the woods, which makes me think of the movement that I was seeing in the fog. Where I live is a very active area for UFO phenomena, which makes sense if something wanted to have an access to major cities like Philadelphia, New York City, Baltimore, and DC. What could possibly be a better place to hide than almost inaccessible 1,000 feet deep lakes in the middle of the woods? I know this is a very long post, but I wanted to be as detailed as possible. I'd really like to hear what you all think about this, and if anybody has a similar experience or knows someone who has. Thanks for reading all the way to the end of this if you did, and feel free to reach out to me. I should start this off by saying I'm one of those people that believes in the paranormal, but doesn't believe 99% of videos or stories out there because of how blatantly fake they are. The following event occurred during my teenage years. I think I must have been 13 to 14 at the time, and although it's not the most mind-blowing thing to have happened, it's still the only unexplainable thing that has ever happened to me personally. Around this time, I was obsessed with anything supernatural. I would go to the library to check out books on UFOs or ghost stories. Every day after school, I used to read true ghost stories on a website called theshadowlands.net. It was then that a series of weird things would start happening around the house, which were witnessed by several people, including my parents and siblings. They would range from my brothers hearing bumps and knocks on the wall at random intervals, to my dad noticing how some lights were turned off on his way back from the bathroom, even though he swore he had turned them on. None of these were witnessed personally by me, though, so the healthy skeptic in me refuses to acknowledge their authenticity on the simple principle of, I have to see it to believe it. I did experience something odd eventually. It all culminated when one evening I was having dinner with my mom. We sat opposite each other. I was facing her, with an obscured view of the kitchen behind her, as there was a counter dividing the rooms. I distinctly remember my brothers and my dad were not home at the time, so it was just the two of us, when suddenly the weirdest thing happened. I can't remember what was for dinner that night, but I still remember, clear as day, I saw the kitchen stove light turn off and back on very distinctly. It wasn't a flicker, which could be attributed to a technical malfunction. No, it was a very distinct on, off, 1 second, on. My mom must have noticed the confusion on my face because she asked what was the matter when the most unexplainable thing happened right after. We both heard this sound, like imagine all your pots and pans being roughed around violently in the kitchen. It even sounded like some fell to the floor, just clanging sounds all over. It was so loud and clear, we looked at each other wide-eyed, and without saying a word, stood up and walked over to the kitchen, expecting a total mess, and there was just nothing out of place. I knew for a fact something strange had happened because I could hear my mom's voice trembling as she was trying to rationalize what just happened to me. She said something like, "Must have been the mice," as we did have a mice problem at that time. But then I told her what I had seen before, about the light turning itself on and off again. She hadn't seen that, as her back was facing the kitchen, so I think she simply chose not to take my account seriously. I'm not sure, today, if she even believed when I told her about it. The noise we heard was so loud, it couldn't have ever been mice, not even a few dozen of them. What's more, nothing seemed out of place. I would be willing to chalk it up to mice, though, just to ease my mind. But I saw what I saw, the light, There's just no way that both of these occurrences happened one after the other, as coincidences. I think it's worth noting that this stove light has never exhibited that behavior before, or since that night as well. I still have no clue what happened then. I doubt I ever will. I'm currently a uni student, and on Tuesday nights, I come home pretty late. Not late enough that my parents would call the police, but just missing the regular bus times. Anyway, as luck would have it, I managed to catch the very last bus one Tuesday night after getting to the station. And typically, it's nothing to be worried about. If you keep to yourself and stick to safe-looking people, other uni students, mothers, the bus driver, you'll be right. Growing up in a dangerous country and migrating to a much safer one hasn't rid me of those instincts. And that night, I got all bad vibes and buzzy. Something was off about the evening, and I didn't know what. We get to the main stop, the shopping center, and I find out that the bus has terminated its route. It's done for the night. Thanks, asshole bus driver. Well, fuck. It's dark, it's late, I can't drive. My parents can't pick me up, they're at yoga, and I'm too broke to afford a taxi. So, I decide to walk home. The exercise will be good for me. Now, from the shopping center, it would take me a good 20 to 30 minutes to reach my house if I power walked. I could probably run home, but fuck that. When you leave the shops, if you follow the road, there's a local Catholic school, a public library, a public school, and a few bus stops along the way. Near the library is a traffic intersection, the most brightly lit area of this entire road, but it's also a very small square. It's a joke, honestly. As I'm walking, it takes me less than a second to realize how fucking dark it was on that street. It was a bit creepy walking by the local Catholic school with their massive fucking crucifix in the middle of a huge mass of land. In front of me is the girl who looks about my age, Asian, and she's walking fairly quickly. Understandable. From the corner of my eye across the road, I see a man, kind of half jogging, half walking, and I'm not sure what he's up to, but it was just weird. I kept an eye on him and the girl. At the intersection, my friend is there, and he greets me enthusiastically, a hug and a kiss on the cheek. He momentarily distracts me from the weird running dude and the girl. Between my friend and I greeting each other, I completely miss when the guy crossed the street and is in my path. My friend turns out to be a douchebag friend and just leaves, even after I told him about the weird dude. I'm not far from the creep and the girl now, but he's talking to her. And if a guy has any common sense, he will not speak to a girl or a woman while she's alone at night. Because we've all heard the horror stories. By this stage, I've quickened my pace into a sprint, holding onto my backpack so that my laptop inside won't make so much noise, and I'm assessing my very limited options on how to save this poor woman. I'm a very small, very unintimidating Asian girl, and the guy looked taller the closer I got. I felt very tiny and incredibly stupid for doing this, because I was still kind of far, but I have crazy good eyesight, and the streetlights were hitting his face, so I could make it out accurately enough in case I needed to identify him. He was a white male, early 30s to 40s, brown hair, wearing glasses, a striped long-sleeve top, and brown khakis. His eyes were really big, though, kind of like that face you make when someone surprises you with something particularly scandalous. And I come up with was probably the most stupidly brilliant plan I've ever concocted. I kind of stand there, hoodie on, feet apart, hands on my hips, and my best, loudest impersonation of an older Filipino woman getting mad at her child's the strongest accent I could. Honestly, if I were a bit taller, I might not have gotten away with this. Hoy, what are you doing, huh? You were supposed to be home already. And talking to a boy, huh? And he's white? Excuse me, look at me while I'm talking to you. I did not raise you like this. And I don't remember exactly word for word what I say, but I'm basically copying whatever my mom says when she's angry with me. The entire time I'm yelling, I can see the guy trying to inch away, and the girl looks so bewildered, like a deer caught in headlights. At this stage, honestly, I'm expecting her to run away. I turn to the guy. "And where do you think you're going, huh?" He fucking ran for it. Like, I swear, it was like watching a cartoon. The girl was still standing there, and I took off my hood and waved at her. I was still far away and asked if she was all right, in my regular, not very Filipino accent. She was just staring at me. I apologized if I scared her, but I had to get him away because my younger sister would tell me about a creepy guy that corners young girls in the park not far from where we live. Anyway, we hugged and exchanged names and numbers, and now we're basically friends forever. It turns out she didn't live very far and didn't even realize what was happening until she could get away from the creep. I ended up walking her home, and from there, her older brother dropped me off. We called the police when we walked to her place. When we retold the story to our families, at this stage, I'd very correctly assumed that they were Philo as well, so communication was easy. They banned us completely from taking the bus past 7. I was reluctant telling my friends this because I knew they'd laugh, but it was such a serious thing. What if I wasn't there? As comical as that sounded, she was really shooken up, but very relieved and grateful. She just kept hugging me and stuff, which is weird. I don't usually hug strangers. Police later stopped a nondescript station wagon about 20 minutes down the main road. In it was a man matching my description. They searched his car and found a few photos of girls in the glove department, and even more on his phone. They were all Asian, specifically Filipino. Months later, after I found out about this, Mom tells me that they actually found photos of my sister and I. It made me shudder. If that creep ever came near my little sister, I would fuck him up. It's also very important to note that the only reason why we got such detailed and updated information was, being the daughter of a surgeon and a lawyer, my parents have connections, and they used them accordingly. If it were different, we would have gotten soothingly vague, at best. I used to be a process server, and I have a lot of interesting stories from that job. I have a couple that really scared me. This is one of those stories that really scared me. This experience helped me confirm that I should always trust my gut. I went to an apartment building to serve someone who lived there. When I was walking up to the building, there was an older man sitting on a bench right by the front door. He had a cane next to him. He was friendly and said hello. I said hello back. And initially my guard was down, so I started to have small talk with him. I attempted to open the front door, but it ended up being locked. I explained to the man that I'm a process server, so I was attempting to give some papers to someone that lives in the building. He started to go on about how he has a daughter my age, and that he wouldn't be comfortable with her being a process server because it wasn't a safe job. He also said it must be extra unsafe for me because I'm so small. I'm 5'2", and at the time I was 110 pounds. I instantly started to feel like something was off. I also thought maybe I was being overdramatic because this is just an older man who has to use a cane. I felt like it was almost rude to be cautious of someone like that. I still had a job to do, and I wasn't going to let this deter me from that. So I asked the man if he was willing to let me into the apartment building. He said he would. It seemed to take him some effort to stand up and walk towards the door with his cane, so I started to feel like I had been overreacting. The man opened the door for me and walked into the building. I was about to go up to the stairs, but the man insisted I take the elevator. I started to feel very uneasy, but for some reason I agreed to take the elevator anyways. I thought the man would leave me alone if I took his suggestion. I started to walk over to the elevator, and he followed me. He continued to talk to me. He even asked about my job and life. I was trying to be vague. When I got onto the elevator, the man also got onto the elevator. At this point, I froze because I didn't understand why he had followed me. The man was standing closer to the back wall of the elevator, and I was standing closer to the door. I didn't want to make eye contact with him in that enclosed space alone, but I was watching him in the reflection of the shiny metal elevator door. I asked him why he got on the elevator with me, and he said that he was watching out from me. When the man said this, I could clearly see that his head was facing me, and it moved down, staring at the floor where my feet were, and then moved up slowly, like he was looking at my body from bottom to top. I started to feel claustrophobic, and that I needed to get off the elevator now. The elevator door opened, and I practically jumped out. I told the man that he needed to stay there because I wanted to respect the privacy of the person that I was serving papers to. Then I told the man to have a nice day because I felt like that's what I needed to say at the time to end the conversation without him trying to continue the conversation. The man just nodded at me. I get off the elevator and begin walking down the hallway looking for the right apartment number that's listed on the documents that are in my hands. I continue walking, and I feel the sensation that I'm being watched, but I don't turn around because I'm too afraid that I'll see the man standing there. I end up having to walk around the corner and further down the hallway. The feeling of being watched goes away, and I know it's because there's now a wall between me and whoever's eyes I could feel were watching my back. I get to the right apartment and knock on the door. There's no answer. I knock again, but this time much louder. Then I wait about 30 seconds and give the door 4 sturdy knocks before waiting patiently. I couldn't hear anyone inside the apartment. No TV, no pets, no microwave running, just nothing. I fully believe the person is not home. I accept defeat. I'm a little annoyed that I went through all this just to arrive at the person's apartments, but they aren't even home. I start to walk back the way I came from. I turn around the corner of the hallway, and what comes into view makes my stomach sink. The man is standing there, one hand on his cane, and one hand hovering in front of the elevator button. I keep walking while a bunch of different thoughts are running through my head. When I start to approach the elevator, the man asks, "How'd it go?" I answer simply, "They weren't home." The man says, "I've been waiting for you here." There was something about how the man said this. I knew that I shouldn't go on the elevator with this man again. I basically did a drive-by and started to fast walk past him. I told him, "Have a nice day. I'm in a hurry." I didn't wait for him to reply and continued to move quickly past the elevator and towards the staircase. Once I reached the stairs, I'm not sure why, but I started running down them. Once I got down one case of stairs, I heard a loud, "Wait!" I looked back once, and I could see the man up on top of the staircase, carrying his cane, and he began to run down the stairs after me. He wasn't using his cane at all to descend down the stairs, and he was moving way faster than he had previously. I turned away and ran as fast as I could down the stairs without falling down. I started to jump down 2 stairs at a time. I knew that he was close behind me because I could hear his loud feet as he was running down behind me. I reached the bottom of the stairs and almost ran into another resident of the building. I apologized and then felt panic when I realized the man was probably right behind me. I looked behind me, and the man was using his cane again to get down the last few steps. I looked back at the other building residents, and they had a puzzled look on their face. I mumbled, "Have a nice day," and booked it out of the apartment building and straight to my car. I didn't check to see if the man was following me, but something in my gut told me that the other resident being present had helped me. When I reached my car, I practically jumped into it. I slammed my car door and hit lock right away. I started my car and pulled out of the lot quickly. The parking lot required me to drive past the front door of the apartment building. I look over to see if there was any sign of that man, and there he was. He had stepped outside the front door and was standing there, leaning on his cane and smiling at me, driving by. He then gave me a slow wave. I don't know why, but I gave a tight-lipped smile. I still felt like I had to be nice, even though something obviously really messed up had just happened. But at least I was in my locked car, driving away, and he had no way of catching up to me. About 4 years ago, I was a junior at a small college in LA County. Bordering my town was a large cavernous region known as Turnbull Canyon. It's the kind of place that has a healthy amount of creepy folklore surrounding it, with an area empathetically known as Hell's Gates. Stories of cultic activity, gang killings, abandoned mental institutions, and the like. The kind of shit you hear about any place old enough to have a reputation. In reality, most of the stories were spurned from a tragedy that occurred years prior. A woman's body was found at the base of a canyon, and from then on, the rest is history. Nevertheless, when a photographer friend asked me and another buddy to go out to the canyon in order to take some photos of the LA skyline, I had to oblige. The canyon was about a 30-minute drive from our campus, and we had been listening to the King of Limbs the entire drive, which proved to be the perfect ambiance to get me feeling pretty anxious about our little excursion. I should also note that I'm a pretty anxious guy in general, so traveling out to a remote area, preceded by its reputation for scary occurrences, admittedly had me thinking twice about the decision. At the top of the canyon, there's a small residential area, a few ritzy houses surrounded by trees and woods. In order to venture into the canyon itself, you have to follow a main trail with several smaller arteries that split off into other directions, but ultimately culminate at the base of a steep hill adorned with an old water tower overlooking the city. Anyhow, we parked our car at the top of the canyon road, divvied up the camera gear, and made our way out to the trailhead around 1 a.m. by this point. After walking the trail for about 5 minutes, Dave, the photographer, decided it was time to set up his first shot, while Jeff, our other friend, and I kept watch. Eventually, he got the shot he needed, and we continued walking for another 5 or so minutes before Dave decided to set up his next shot. At this point, the trailhead had disappeared behind us completely, and we were a little less than a quarter of the way to the water tower. While setting up the tripod, we noticed the faint glow of headlights off in the distance, which was strange because the trail isn't meant for cars, nor is it big enough for them to pass through. If I recall, it's only about 5 feet wide, with shrubbery on both sides. This was clearly a bit of a red flag for us, as we were the only people out there, so we immediately packed up our things and ducked off into the brush, waiting for the car to pass on. Eventually, an old pickup truck idled to a stop, about 50 yards from where we were hiding. The truck itself was old and rickety, sitting on a lifted chassis, the bed of which was missing entirely. Growing up in the country, I knew it as the type of truck typically owned by backwoods folks who lived in the boonies and preferred to be left to their own devices. We watched in agonizing anticipation as the truck just idled in place for several minutes before flooring it down one of the other trails, the roar of the engine echoing throughout the canyon. Clearly, we were spooked at this point, the three of us speculating as to our next step. Jeff and I were reluctant to continue, while Dave assured us that it was probably nothing, perhaps just a guy off-roading, as he put it. So with great reluctance, Jeff and I trudged on behind Dave towards the water tower to get his final shots. Nevertheless, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about the truck. I mean, I knew plenty of people in high school who would go off-roading for fun in the woods, but never on finicky canyon trails, barely wide enough to even hike on, let alone drive. It just didn't sit right with me. After walking without interference for about an hour, we finally made it to the water tower, climbed up the hill to the top, and took in the view of the city. Dave, once again, started setting up his equipment, while Jeff and I stood on both sides of the water tower, keeping watch just in case the truck came back. Nothing. At this point, it's around 3 a.m. Dave decides that he's got all the shots he needs, so we pack up our equipment and commit to head back before it gets too late, seeing as how all of us have classes in just a few hours. Just as we're preparing to descend the hill, the truck comes roaring out of the canyon below us, back onto the trail, at which the driver attempts to climb the hill, revving the engine loudly. Scared shitless, the three of us slide off the side of the hill into the brush, clinging to plants and rocks. As the truck finally made it atop the hill, slowly driving around the tower, we could see the glow of the headlights each time it circled above us. After waiting for nearly 10 minutes, while also trying not to make any noise, the truck eventually descended the hill, stopping in the middle of the trail not more than 100 yards away. We watched as a scruffy man, mid-50s, stepped out of the idling truck and into the glow of its headlights, moseying around while looking at the ground. He then knelt down, looking at something in the dirt, surveying the area intently. As he did so, it became increasingly apparent that he was tracking something. Our footprints. This next part still chills me to the bone. As my friends and I huddled together, watching in complete terror, another man wearing a long, dark parka emerged from the brush, right where we had been hiking, joining the other man at his side. Apparently he had been out there the entire time we were walking the trail, just watching us, following behind at a safe distance. The two of them talked for a long while, but we couldn't hear a word. They continued scanning the area, looking at our footprints, but eventually got in the truck and drove off down one of the forks in the trail. We sat in silence for a long time, waiting nearly 2 hours just to ensure the coast was clear, at which point we made like hell back to the car, down the canyon, and back to our campus, just in time for class. This happened to me in the fall of 2002, when I was almost 9 years old and in 4th grade. It was an overcast day, typical of October in New England. I'd recently been given a lot more freedom by my parents, and I was allowed to stay after school for however long I wanted, or go down to the convenience store with friends. I usually just stayed for about a half hour and fought with people or played kickball. If my parents really needed me, they were only 2 blocks away and knew where to find me. This day, we were having a huge horse basketball competition. There were maybe 20 of us, all vying to win recognition from our peers and the many parents who were standing around watching. I think I was one of the few whose parents didn't pick him up anymore, and that meant I could outlast anyone who had an impatient mom or dad. Within about 10 minutes, half of the people were knocked out. We were 4th graders, and mostly white kids, or their parents had made them come home. And that's when I saw him. He was a middle-aged man wearing a brown corduroy jacket, standing by the fence that surrounded the blacktop, about 30 feet away from the other parents. But that's not why he stood out. 1, he was Asian, and my school was not a very diverse school. We had white kids and black kids, a few Indian kids, myself, and exactly 2 Asian kids, both from the same family. But they owned a restaurant, and I pretty much knew all of them. So who the hell was this guy? 2, he was shorter than every single parent, and he appeared to be shorter than me, though I was kind of tall for my age at the time. I kept looking at him throughout the game. He just had this look of content on his face. His thin but wide-stretching lips were slightly turned upwards. He was ever so pleased about something. I got knocked out 4th to last, but I stayed to see who won. I noticed that the man was now sitting on a bench, just a bit closer to everyone. One of my best friends got knocked out next, and then he and his mom invited me over to their house. I wish I had accepted the offer, but I couldn't because nobody in my family had cell phones at the time. My mom would be expecting me home when she got back from picking up my brothers at daycare. So I stayed until the end and was relieved when I saw the little man go out of the gate. But he didn't keep walking. He just stood outside the chain-link fence, facing the road. Just to be safe, I exited closely behind another kid and his mom, way the fuck across the blacktop at the other gate. After they drove off, I realized there was no one else left on the school grounds. There was just about half a block's length of chain-link fence between me and the man. I wanted to get into a friendly territory as fast as possible, so instead of walking down the main road towards my street, I sped walked to the neighboring street. I wish I'd stayed on the main road. I turned around after crossing to find he had crossed the main road with me. I broke for the nearest house on the street that I knew of. It was the house of a kid in my class who had a really big dog, so I figured it would be perfect. I fucking machine gun knocked on his door, and loud. No one answered. Exasperated, I ran to the back. No dog. I ran back down the driveway and practically screeched to a halt when I saw the man turning around the corner and heading my way. I don't mean to offend the vertically challenged, but there's just something unsettling about a man whose torso is overly long and his head is too big for his body, contently half waddling down the street towards your 8-year-old self. But now I had a plan. There were several places between the houses on this street and my street that didn't have fences, or they were at least very short fences dividing them, so you could walk right onto my street. We called them secret passageways. The nearest one was almost at the end of this block, and if I went through it, I would just be a couple houses past mine. I wanted the man to be taken aback when I effectively vanished down the block, so I went back to a spirited walk. By this time, it was drizzling, and I was covered in rain and sweat. My plan went off pretty much without a hitch. He followed me down the street on the other side, but when I got to the secret passageway, I made a sharp left and raced down the driveway across the grass, jumped the short fence, across the next yard, ran down the next driveway, and all but leapt the street to the side my house was on. I looked around. He was nowhere to be found. And now it was raining in earnest, so I just casually walked up to my house, traipsed across the lawn, popped open the door, and breathed a sigh of relief. I wish I had kept to the front walkway. Now, it doesn't take a detective to spot size 7 footprints in the mud that led through a yard, over a fence, and through another yard. And it's still not difficult to find those same footprints in another yard, leading to the front door just a few houses away from where they stopped. I was sitting in my parents' room on the computer when I noticed a small figure out of the corner of my eye. My heart stopped when I saw him out the window, standing on the sidewalk, just staring up at me. It was raining buckets, but he didn't care. I ran to the phone, but my mom has a nasty habit of making 2-hour phone calls to her sisters and not putting the phone back in the charger. It was on her bed, and the red light was blinking at me. Well, I just lost it at that point. I buckled to the floor and started hyperventilating. What the fuck did this guy want? I was on my knees for the longest time, digging my hands into the carpet in a fury and despair. I could attack him. When I thought about it logically, he didn't seem like much of a threat, but maybe he had a weapon or something. I could just scream out the window at him, but I didn't really even want to know if he was still there. So I decided to bluff my way out of the situation. I taped 4 pieces of printer paper together and wrote in big writing in a permanent black marker, "I called the police." I crawled to the front window, and without looking out it, I just held up the sign against the glass. My hands were shaking, but I pressed them hard against the window, so they stopped. After what seemed like ages, I dared to peek out. He was gone. I told my mom when she got back, but she had a hard time believing that a small Asian man chased me home from school. Still, she picked me up from school for weeks afterwards, and I never saw him again. It's one of those things I remind my parents about time and time again, but every time I repeat it, it sounds like it was just a nightmare or something. But the sign existed up until I found it in 10th or 11th grade and recycled it. And I still remember exactly what he looked like, half waddling, and so pleased to see me. This happened to me a few years back when I was in my early 20s. At the time, I worked at a department store at a makeup counter. The job relies heavily on good customer service and building relationships because you want people to keep coming back to spend money on your products. We are given personalized business cards so that we can build our own client base, very important for a commission department. It's not uncommon to be familiar with the people who frequently shop in this store. As workers, our training is focused on being friendly and accommodating. One day when I was working, I had to move to a makeup counter that wasn't my own to cover someone's lunch break. It was a really slow day, so I was just leaning on the counter, people watching. I could tell most shoppers were just browsing, so I kept to myself. One of the people that I noticed was a very tall and broad man. He walked very slowly, almost hunched over. His face was fixed very aggressively, like he was angry but focused. He circled around the counter a few times, but I could feel his gaze on me instead of the products. After a few rotations around the department, I decided to greet him in case he needed help. It wasn't until he came directly over me that I realized just how big he actually was. I'm a 4'10", 140-pound female, so I feel pretty small regardless. But even with his slouched posture, he was over 6 feet tall and well over twice my weight. I'll never forget his teeth. They were completely black in the front. Your eyes couldn't help but go right to them. Despite his menacing appearance, he was soft-spoken. Truthfully, I could tell he wasn't all there by the way he talked. He told me no when I asked if he needed help, but requested my number, so direct. We had never spoken before. I declined and said that I was in a relationship and that it would be inappropriate. He then asked if he could have a business card for the counter in case he wanted to get products. Since I wasn't on my normal counter and I really wanted him to go away, I handed him my coworker's business cards and told him to call if he had any questions. It worked, and he walked away after that, filling me with relief. Only a couple minutes later, the phone on the counter rings. I answer with my preppy customer service voice and say, "Thank you for calling," makeup brand name. "How can I help you?" And immediately, I know it's the same guy when he starts talking. He asks me again for my personal number, and I explain once again that I cannot do that. But he just wants to talk, he explains. Since he wasn't getting the hint, I say, "I should have told you that I'm married. You can't have my number." Politely, he apologizes and hangs up. I thought that would be the end of him, but for the next few weeks or so, I spent much of my time at work anxious that he would show up. I would see him every week, and he would lurk around the counter looking for me. Anytime I would see him, I'd immediately drop what I was doing and run and hide, or run to the closest customer and offer any bit of assistance to make it look like I was busy so he wouldn't talk to me. I successfully dodged him every time, and it came to the point where I stopped seeing him. I was thrilled. I'd almost completely forgotten about him until one day I decided to go to Walmart by myself to pick up a few things on my day off. I generally like to shop alone. I can take all the time I need, and I like leisurely looking around. I grabbed a basket and made my way over to the cosmetic, hair, wellness section, since that's where most of the things I needed were. I only managed to grab a few things before I locked eyes with him as I walked by the supplement aisle. I'd recently changed my hair color and wasn't wearing my work uniform, so I didn't think he'd realize who I was. I was ready to just go about my shopping and ignore him until I noticed that he dropped the items he had in his hand and started heading my way. I panicked and stiffened my pace immediately. I thought to myself, he's not going to really follow you through the store, right? But as soon as I look around, I could see his humongous body just plowing through people with that same terrifying look on his face, only meaner, his black teeth growing closer with a snarl. Since the direction I was walking was the opposite of the exit, and there was no way in hell I was going to turn around, I decided that my best course of action would be to follow the perimeter of the store and cut down the center section, which would bring me close to the registers. I speed-walked the entire time in the hopes of losing him amongst all the people, but never once turning around again. By the time I made it to the register area, I could actually feel him behind me. Still not wanting to turn around to look, I glanced in the reflection of the soda machines that are in between the register aisles to see how close he was. To my horror, there was only about 1.5 to 2 feet between us. I was afraid to just drop my stuff and run out of the door in case he followed me to my car. I parked in the far back of the parking lot and didn't want to risk it. I also didn't want to get in line at the register since the lines were long and I would just be standing out in the open, alone. Instead, I walked to the cluster of people crowded around the self-checkout line. I noticed another large but older gentleman with his carriage in the middle and ran straight for him. The people were so closely clustered together that the man following me couldn't make it through. I ran over to the man in line and grabbed onto his carriage. I said, "I'm so sorry. I'm not cutting you, but there's a man that's been following me through half the store, and I need to stand with you." He was so sweet and let me be with him while we waited in line, and even let me go ahead of him so I could leave quicker. As I was cashing out, I could see in my peripheral vision my stalker staring at me and pacing about, but he couldn't come near me since the self-checkout is somewhat sectioned off. By the time I had finished and grabbed my receipt, I couldn't see him anymore. I looked around, but he was nowhere. I thought about asking the older man to walk me to my car, but he still wasn't finished at the register, so I decided to call my boyfriend and make a run for it. Staying on the phone, I explained to him what was going on as I sprinted to my car in tears, frantically looking around in case he tried to follow me outside. I made it to my car safely and rushed right home, breaking down to my parents about what just happened. I could feel it in my bones that that man wanted to do something to me, and thankfully, I didn't find out what it was. His aggressive aura was palpable. To this day, I can still remember the adrenaline, nervousness, the sheer terror I felt when he followed me. I'd never felt so vulnerable and helpless, even with all of those people around. I quit that job roughly 2 years later. I had only seen him one other time there since the incident, but I still live in constant fear that we will cross paths again. I'm afraid to shop alone, something that I wouldn't give a second thought to years before. So, to my stalker with the black teeth, let's not meet again. When I was 18, I got a job at Walmart. Small town, not much else there for someone fresh out of high school. I've been there about a month and worked in the jewelry department, usually from mid-afternoon until the department closed at 9 p.m. And I would close the department by myself, but obviously, Walmart is open 24 hours, so other people were always around. One night, I'm locking the cases up and putting things away, and an overnight stalker walks by and says hi. I look up, smile, say hi back, and then go about my business. This guy, the only way I can describe him, is to say he looks like one of the Bee Gees. Shoulder-length frizzy hair, kind of a bouncy hop to his step when he walked, mid-50s. This started to become a regular thing on nights I closed by myself. He'd walk by and say hi, and I would say hi back. That's it. No conversations ever took place. Then, on my birthday, a few of my friends who worked there got me a cake, and I hugged them and said thank you, etc. About an hour later, Mr. Bee Gees comes around with a birthday card and gave it to my manager to give to me. Manager thought it was extremely funny that this weirdo got me a card until I opened it.
Happy birthday. I saw you hugging those guys earlier. It made me really mad, but I called a friend and talked it out, and he made me realize you're allowed to have friends other than me. Just please don't hug them anymore. Save those hugs for me. I don't know what kind of emotion was shown on my face, but my manager grabbed the card and read it, and then walked me back to the store manager's office and showed it to him. Store manager said that the guy was obviously joking, but that he would talk to him about it. I didn't see Mr. Bee Gees for about a week, until one night when I was closing, he plunked down a stuffed envelope on my counter as he walked by without a word. Inside was 6 pages, front and back, of pure crazy. It was basically his entire life story, all about his family and schools he went to, but with weird stuff like how his sister was a psychic and his father was an exorcist and all sorts of weirdness.
The end of the letter was about how his friend who was 18 months old was missing, and he knew she was being raped because he could hear her screaming his name in his dreams. What? So that also went to the store manager, and he had me write a written complaint. He told me not to go outside by myself, and not to wander near where the guy might be while I'm on my breaks. No? Get rid of him? 2 nights later, I was finishing up for the night, and the way that the counter is set up, there's one opening and the counters go all the way around both sides. He brought a handcart around with boxes for my department, but pushed it into the only opening in the counters, so I was trapped inside. He just stood there and stared at me while I looked at him with what I'm sure was pure terror. I was then, and still am now, riddled with anxiety. I don't like confrontation, and the last thing I wanted was for this weirdo to confront me about reporting him twice. He whispers, "Sorry, I didn't mean to scare ya." I turn around and started finishing my closing tasks, pretending he wasn't there, even though I could feel him watching me. After a few minutes, I just look at him and said, "Weren't you told to stay away from me?" He gave me this gross predator grin and said, store's manager's name, asked me if I was joking. I told him I was. Then he leaned in as close to me as he could get, with the counter between us, and whispered, "But I'm not joking." Then he walked away. For 2 weeks after that, he would randomly show up wherever I was. I would leave for lunch. He would be there. Even non-work places. I would go to the mall, and he would be there. Another department manager told me that he had been reported by 4 other people over the last 2 years for very similar behavior. I again went to my store manager, who told me that the guy was harmless and maybe had a little bit of a crush. He was in his 50s, and I was 18 to 19 during this crap. A week later, I gave my notice and quit. He still works there 13 years later. Still gives me the heebie-jeebies. I, female 17, recently quit my job at a fast food chain after working there for almost 10 months. This story is part of the reason why I did not want to stay much longer. I worked the drive-thru from 5 p.m. till 11 p.m. almost every weekend. Seeing regulars was not uncommon for me, and I would even memorize most of their orders and fill it out as soon as I heard their voice. Most people were very polite and occasionally tipped, but on one particularly busy day, there was an unfamiliar, weary presence. I just started my shift, so I was running food to the window. I made eye contact with the man at the window in his car and immediately felt uneasy. I brushed it off because we were busy and I had work to do. Later, once my manager set up my cash drawer, I took over drive-thru orders, payments, etc. There were a lot of orders, so I was not paying special attention to specific voices or menu choices, but one caught my attention. It was a low, hesitant voice, asking for a sandwich. I give the man the total, and he waits in line. He arrives at the window, and it's the man from earlier. I assumed he just forgot to order something. Now, his car was pretty low to the ground, so he had to extend his arm out to hand me his debit card. As he does this, he mumbles something under his breath without breaking eye contact with me. "I'm sorry, what was that?" I question.
"I said, you're looking beautiful today."
At this point, I'm super uncomfortable. Not only do I have a boyfriend, but I'm also underage and not at all interested. "Oh, thank you," I say nervously. I handed him the bag of food and quickly shut the window until he drove away. I half-heartedly complained about him to some coworkers, all male, as we usually do with weird customers, but I still had a strange gut feeling. A little while later, when the average wait in our line was about 10 minutes, I hear a familiar voice over the mic asking for a cup of water. It was low, but agitated and forceful. I saw his face through his windshields and walked away from the window so my manager would take care of him. This happened a couple more times that day, asking for straws and other free things. At that point, I was sure that he was just trying to look at me. I was so frustrated with him and the rest of my workday that I went to the bathroom and cried. I usually have pretty thick skin when it comes to this stuff, but I was just so over it. The rest of the night went on, and I did not see him again. I thought I'd probably never see him again until my very last shift at the store a few months later. We weren't busy that evening, but it was much later in the day than the first encounter. I did not recognize the voice, but I immediately recognized his face and car. I swallowed my pride and took his payment, trying not to make eye contact. I called my manager, and he said that he would give the food out for me. As suspected, the man was back in the drive-thru not long afterwards for a cup of water. This time, I knew better. I sent a male coworker to the window to get it for him, since I was busy anyway. Once given the water, the man asked my coworker,
"You guys close at 11 now, right?"
I was so glad I was getting picked up by my mom that night. I was constantly looking out the windows and making sure he wasn't out there waiting for me. Call me paranoid, but I listened to enough true crime to be overly cautious. So, to the creepy man in the drive-thru with bloodshot eyes, let's not meet again. Back in 2001, my friend and I went up to her aunt's cabin for the weekends in the middle of nowhere, Mississippi. On the way back home, we fucked up and tempted fate by talking about who of our friends we would call if something happens, like our car breaking down or something. Sure enough, doing 60, her engine just dies, and we maneuver to the side of the road and try not to freak out. Nervously laughing, we pull out our phones to make our calls, but no dice, 0 bars. Now we're freaking out. There's been nothing in sight for miles, but we do see a light from a trailer off the road up ahead, and we hash out whether to go ask for help or what to do. Finally, we decide we have to go knock and ask to use their phones to call for help. We walk up the long gravel drive, and as we're climbing the steps, my friend tells me not to worry and shows me the butt of a pistol she had tucked in the back of her pants, which honestly just made me worry more. At that point, I felt like my knees were knocking loud enough to rattle the windows and announce our presence, but I raise my hand and knock on the door. An old bearded white guy in a tattered white tank top answers and looks us up and down. In response to our request for use of his phone, he slowly draws out, "We don't have phones round here." As we're looking from him to each other and back, trying to process a reality where there are places without phone lines in the new millennium in America, we hear the crunch of footsteps on the gravel drive behind us and turn. Up walks a young couple to ask if they could use a phone because their car has broken down and they don't have any bars on their cell. At this point, I'm sincerely freaking out because I've seen the hills have eyes, and I'm quite convinced that all sorts of terrible things are going to happen to us this night, probably the most pleasant of which will be death. I was calculating the odds of a backwoods Mississippi guy having an actual EMP cannon. This had to be some kind of trap, or maybe one of those hidden camera gotcha kind of shows that were so popular in the 90s, like that one Shannon Doherty hosted, where they scared the shit out of people for laughs. He offers to drive us to the nearest payphone, and my friend and I quietly discuss our options. Somehow she convinces me that we should go, and she'll protect us all if he tries anything. We agree to take the ride and thank him, following him around the side of the trailer to his windowless white van. I balked hard at this point, but ultimately we all loaded up and I prepared myself for the worst while silently praying as the 4 of us climbed in the back. I was simultaneously making peace with my life and centering myself for a potential fight to the death. Obviously, we made it. He drove us about 20 miles to a phone, and we called the cavalry without further incident. He chuckled a bunch about how weird it was that 2 couples' cars had broken down outside his place that night. To this day, that is the creepiest and most incredulously weird night of my life. One or 2 months ago, my girlfriend and I went out to our favorite bar. The drive is a tad longer than an hour to our place from the bar, primarily on barren interstate after the first 15 minutes, save for a few rural exits and one rest stop a little over halfway home. My girlfriend was sober that night and was driving. I had a bit to drink and was feeling warm and tipsy. I asked my girlfriend to make a quick stop at the rest stop so I could pee. Thanks, beer. This is a normal stop for us to make if one of us has been drinking, since the rest area has its own direct exit and entrance, so it's faster than taking an actual exit into a town for a gas station. The rest area has only one road in and one out, and is surrounded by trees to the point that you can't see the facility from the freeway. It has wooded walking trails. By the time I hopped out of the car at the rest stop, it was sometime around 3 a.m. As mentioned, this is a fairly regular stop, and until that day, the only person I had seen in that rest stop around that time of night was the guy who maintains it. I walk in. The vending area is empty and completely silent. I make my way over to the men's room and push it open to be immediately startled by this old man, maybe mid-60s or so, standing immediately to the left of the door inside the bathroom. He was wearing what I can only describe as an Inspector Gadget coat and slacks. I noticed he had a cell phone in his hand when I opened the door, but it was hanging down at his side, and the screen was not lit up. He stares at me, and I stare back for a split second. Then I get over it and pass him to head over to the urinals. I take the urinal closest to the sinks when I noticed he made no indication that he was going to walk out. There's basically a wall of mirrors stretched out for enough that I can watch him in the mirror while I'm at the urinal. I unzip and keep my eyes on the mirror, but I make sure not to turn my head at all. By the time I look in the mirror, his phone is up in his hand and on as if he were texting, but he seems to be staring at me rather than at the phone. Either way, he definitely was not looking at his phone. A very long 60 seconds pass, and I absolutely cannot piss with this silent guy staring at my back from the door. Then in the mirror, I notice him take a small, slow step forward. I tell myself that I'm just tipsy and imagining it, to just get on with my piss and GTFO. Then he takes a more obvious step forward, and I put it in my pants while I speed walk to the back handicap stall and lock the door. I went to the back where my feet were invisible and texted my girlfriend about the creepy guy inside with me. I sit and wait to hear the door open, signaling him leaving, but it still doesn't. After possibly the longest 8 minutes of my life, I hear the door open and close. I wait another 2 minutes and finally pee in the stall though. I crack the stall door first. Luckily the bathroom isn't huge, and I had almost complete visibility of the room from the stall I picked. I saw no signs of anyone else, so I walked out, washed my hands, and beelined it back to the parking lot. I finally made it back to the car and asked my girlfriend what car the old guy got into. She turns to me wide-eyed and says, "He didn't get into one. He just walked across the parking lot and went into the tree line." With the rest stop being the only thing on the very short on-off ramps, and the other closest civilization being 5 miles by interstate, I don't know where that guy was going. Later I realized although the rest area main room is small, there's a second entrance and exit on the side that goes into the patio back into the woods. I forget about it because I never use it. But if that guy had somehow managed to get a jump on me, he easily could have pulled me out of that door, and my girlfriend wouldn't have even seen it. I don't know if that was his plan, and I ruined it when I made my dash for the stall. But regardless, old man creeping in the rest stop bathroom in the wee hours. Let's not meet again. I was a 20-year-old college student, and my friend and I were living and working near her college for the summer. A guy she worked with invited us to a party at his place. The two of us went, along with 3 other friends. We turned out to be the only females at the party. There were at least twice as many guys there. After drinking and playing a few drinking games, people started to leave. A large group of guys were invited to another party and left to go there. Then, our 3 other friends decided to go too. It was down to the host, my roommate, and the 2 other guys. For some reason, maybe we ran out of alcohol, we decided to go to this other party. I had a few drinks, but not enough that I was seriously impaired. My roommate, though, was pretty tipsy. She was walking with her friend from work, and the other 2 guys who had been talking to me at the party were walking close to me and talking to me. At one point, my friend and her coworker were walking far enough from us to be out of earshot. The 2 guys told me that they knew of a shortcut and tried to get me to follow them down a dark alley. I told them I wanted to stick with the group. They tried to persist me for a few minutes, but I was adamant that I not be separated from my roommate. Somehow mysteriously, we never found the party. The details are a bit fuzzy, but I think they couldn't find the exact location. This was the mid-1990s, so no one had a cell phone to call or text to confirm a location. My roommate told her coworker she wanted to walk around to find another party because she wasn't ready to go home yet. There were lots of people out, and often you would run into someone who would invite you somewhere. I told her I just wanted to go home. I was desperate to get away from those guys. My roommate was feeling good and just not having it. The 2 guys started to whisper to one another, but I was able to hear some of what they were saying. One said, "No, didn't you hear what she said? They live with 4 guys." This was true. We had 4 male roommates, which at some point had come up in conversation earlier. This immediately set off more alarm bells. I continued to argue with my friends, and eventually she realized we weren't going to find another party. The 2 creepy guys left, and her coworker walked us home. On the way home, I told them I wanted to leave because those guys were scaring me, and why. If this were to happen now, I would call those guys out in front of everyone and make a scene. Hi, friends. Thanks so much for hanging out with me tonight. I hope you enjoyed these stories. If you like this video, please don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe if you'd like to hear more from me. Thank you so much for being here. I hope you have a wonderful night. Please take care of yourself, and sweet dreams.